tell me about transparency and how it comes in to this framework.
So first of all, we need to recognize that the asymmetry of information that dominates the banking industry and the revenue generation mechanism is not about information asymmetry. You can receive as much as information as you want. A lot of people will not be capable of understanding finance.
Before 2019 ends, I had to reconnect with Paolo.
That's good.
It's always good to connect with you, both virtually and in person. We started this year with a podcast around your book. Since then, I have read over your book at least twice. It's dense. It's supposed to be dense because it's a whole theory with new principles. And I wanted to meet with you today to discuss these principles and reiterate the main points. So welcome and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks, I'm flattered to be here with you, Evie.
Look, Paolo, shifting thinking, as you know, is not an easy task.
No, I think the most complex innovation of all is to change the way we believe the world works, so finance. That's why we are here.
Right. And language plays a role because
It does.
we all interpret what we are hearing and we have our own beliefs, and that's really the battle that goes in our mind. So I want to ask you a couple of questions, and they're going to be to the point and dense, and I want to the point answers. Otherwise, we could be talking all day. We enjoy exchanging ideas. So let's start with the two core principles behind FMT. And FMT, when you see FMT going forward, everybody should understand financial market transparency. The beginning, I must say, I was thinking financial market theory. So go back to that FMT. What are the core principles? Two.
So the core principles are the biological underpinnings of capital markets, which are the concept of fundamental uncertainty and the irreversibility of time. And they explain everything because finance is nothing but selling uncertainty over time.
Great, great. So two core principles that are really coming sort of against what I was taught when I went to business school and when I was studying financial market theory and talking about all the models that had homogeneous expectations,
Yes.
right? And you're bringing this into your theory and talking about our behavior. What is your main point about human behavior?
Well, you see, the Homo economicus does not really exist, this homogeneity of the rational individual. What really exists and lives on the planet is the Homo sapiens, who biologically is wired to deal with fundamental uncertainty and the irreversibility of time, because the Homo sapiens has to survive, so his investments, her investments, and at the same time he needs to find purpose over time in order to be happy in life and to move forward. So these are the two elements that we need to consider. Therefore, if we don't reconnect to the reality of the Homo sapiens, we don't understand how to best approach finance and to relate to investment decision making under uncertainty.
Great. So admitting the nature of the human being that is irrational in a certain sense, right? Meaning emotional. What is the right word?
Well, you see, even behavioral scientists recognized lately that rationality versus irrationality is not the right fight, because rationality is true only ex post. And you can make rational decisions only if you have full information about the problem that you have to solve, while the future is open. You don't have, and definitely in finance, you don't own the future. At the same time, irrationality might be needed more in terms of emotions, because when you don't have full information, you need to follow a bit more your gut feelings. Your body, your brain gives you warning about uncertainty, and you need to be capable of recognizing them. So rationality and irrationality in reality are like yin and yang. They cannot be really told apart. Is our brain and our body that are working together. The right concept is the one of reality, therefore reasonability. So we cannot expect individuals and societies to make rational decisions. What we can expect is that we make reasonable decisions. To understand reasonability, we need transparency. Because if we know somebody else's goal, it will be reasonable against his goals. We can agree or disagree, but the discussion becomes more thorough and constructive. Otherwise, we keep on circling inside the loop and we never get out of that until the next financial crisis, the next collapse.
And this is exactly where you bring in transparency, or rather transparency comes in to the theory that you're laying out and to the business model that financial services should follow. Because when I was starting my career on Wall Street, transparency was not the name of the game. And the main edge of the business model was asymmetric information and protecting asymmetric information.
Yes.
Now we're not there, right? So tell me about transparency and how it comes in to this framework.
So first of all, we need to recognize that the asymmetry of information that dominates the banking industry and the revenue generation mechanism is not about information asymmetry. You can receive as much as information as you want. A lot of people will not be capable of understanding finance. The asymmetry of information is about the biological asymmetry. So our difficulty of dealing with open futures, of dealing with uncertainty. And making decisions under uncertainty over time.
And admitting that the world is unstable and not stable.
Exactly. So transparency already allows you to admit that instability is the norm in finance, not
Correct.
stability. Stability is a framework that we create to kick uncertainty out, to try to optimize and to make a decision. And then we start believing the decision and we lead to collapse because the model doesn't work, which has happened with the global financial crisis and happened before and might happen in the future. If we don't change the way we look at the problem of finance, and therefore we don't learn how to modify the business model of finance. So transparency enables us to reconnect with the reality of the Homo sapiens and the way agents make decisions in complex economies, which is about the way they deal with survival, so facing fundamental uncertainty, and purpose, self-responsibility on the reversibility of time, because time goes always ahead in one direction. This is also important for technology, because technology at the same time needs to be more transparent, because transparency is about cost, incentives, and consequences, and only if our economic action, our fintech action is based on transparency, we don't just promote change, but we build progress.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is that we have to admit and incorporate in our framework, our thinking and our models, instability, emotional behavior from human beings facing uncertainty and the reversible time. And now this brings me to ask about artificial intelligence and how it fits in to such framework, where artificial intelligence in a framework that is facing instability and how humans react. So what about the predictive power of artificial intelligence, and how do you think technology should be incorporating?
Well, let's say that AI can do many things, but it cannot do everything, exactly because the future is not part of big data. So we need to be very careful of the way we use technology, because in order to use it for the good, this element needs to be properly understood. Okay. Now, how do these old things relate the one to the other? I said finance is nothing but trading uncertainty over time. And guess what? The source of our consciousness is our special human relationship with the issue of fundamental uncertainty, survival, and irreversibility of time, purpose in order to age and to move forward. What is the main drawback of modern portfolio theory? Well, the fact that the efficient frontier, which is a result of a mathematical optimization, does not have uncertainty endogenous, built in,
yes.
and is atemporal, does not enable you to distinguish the passage of time when you discuss investing. Now, artificial intelligence is nothing but a mathematical optimization based on a large set of data to infer a prediction, therefore a decision. So when the big data set is good enough to contain the majority of the information that is available, AI will have good predictive power. The moment the big data set is not sufficient, so it cannot predict the future because the uncertainty is not built inside, that might be a bad predictor. So understanding this will enable you to relate to artificial intelligence in the proper way to use it at best.
So all in all, I'm hearing from you that the financial market transparency theory is leading us towards thinking about open source modeling, which is kind of an oxymoron, because I have been thinking and rethinking about these concepts nudged from the blockchain space and the crypto sort of revolution or decentralized finance. But you're coming to sort of the same core principle about open source modeling of behavior of markets, of how agents behave, from a very different angle. Does that make sense? Is there something that is incoherent here?
Well, it goes back to our biological configuration. So that's why fundamental uncertainty is one of the pillars of human consciousness. How do our brain deal with uncertainty? Well, if we cannot resolve it, the brain cannot resolve this problem. It will consume too much energy in the body, therefore the body will collapse, we will die. So the brain is used to filter out issues from the problem, assuming that uncertainty, when it's too far away, should not be considered. And then we move forward. But this poses a problem that we close our way of thinking. We assume we know everything. We move forward. If it's about driving, maybe it's okay. But if it's about society, it becomes a problem after a while. So the economic system, which is very, very complex. So what we need to learn is to make sure that we open up our framework, the decision-making framework, recognizing that we don't own the future. This way we can bring in externalities like the environmental problem, the global warming, that from a rational perspective, given the optimization that we want to do on our daily life, might not make sense, right? Because these problems requires us to sacrifice something for a future which is very distant. Might not be next generation, might be next to next generation. So only by learning this, we understand that our decision making needs to be different, and therefore we start building progress and we avoid collapse. Because collapse happens because at some point our model that we have used to represent reality does not correspond to the reality itself. The two conflict and there is a collapse. The same happened in finance. The global financial crisis was basically the fact that the model did not represent the economic reality any longer, overstretched it.
You remind me of the famous declaration that Alan Greenspan made after the financial crisis, saying, "I must admit that the model that I had in mind did not work."
Yes, Alan Greenspan was invited to speak in front of the US Senate in 2009, explaining why the financial system was collapsing. And he said what is basically defined radical candor. He said, we found a flaw in the model, The
Yep.
agents are now rational, therefore markets with more or less regulation cannot be efficient. What happened after is that on the one side, central banks tried to save the system with the quantitative easing. Now we are in the infinity QE. We see that we cannot get out of the framework, which is the new normal of the monetary policy. And we built the idea of the too big to fail, which again is an issue. It can be problematic because dinosaurs were not too big to fail, while variety of economic offers of economic players should be favored because that typically generates opportunities. The second response to Alan Greenspan was behavioral science. The idea that if the agents are not rational, if I nudge them, I can make them rational. But you see, even Kahneman, in a recent interview at the CFA Institute conference in Hong Kong 2018, said that the concept of bias is overrated because in reality we need to deal with noise. Noise is the corresponding element to me to my fundamental uncertainty definition. And therefore we need to recognize that we need to be rational and irrational at the same time. So we need to look at the reality of the Homo sapiens. The third response was the regulatory response, like the MiFID II in Europe, which is based on transparency as a criteria to modify the interaction between the agents. Now, regulation is not perfect, but the principles of the MiFID II were consistent and correct. The only issue with this type of regulation is that it looks at the financial institutions, but it doesn't know how to deal with the final user of finance, which is the general public. So the financial market transparency theory is addressing the problem of the Homo sapiens to relate with the financial problem, asking financial institutions to learn how to really generate value for their clients by elevating them through the concept of holistic behavioral awareness. In essence, if banks needs to be paid for value, and that needs to happen more and more transparently, the only way forward is for them to understand what keeps the Homo sapiens at bay and generate financial education in front of the people in order to be rewarded for the effort that they're making. This is progress, it's not only change.
So this is where we're heading to today, because what I hear from you is that financial providers can't be paid for being intermediaries of certain transactions, and we're seeing that already in the market, whereas they have to shift their model to offer value in a very different way, that is around this holistic advice that you've been talking about from the early days when you wrote your first fintech book.
Yes, the financial market transparency theory is a practical theory, because by mapping the reality of the Homo sapiens in dealing with fundamental uncertainty and the irreversibility of time, therefore the problem of finance, helps to define a new business model for banking worldwide, which corresponds to the shift which is happening anyway in capital markets these days. We see that banks are moving from transactions to services because the embedded commissions inside the products are lower and lower, and interest rate margin cannot reward the shareholders because interest rates are very low. They become negative in a few countries. The cost of capital is very high. Therefore, banks cannot be a mechanism of transmission of the monetary policy any longer. If you fast forward with ideas that come out of the stable coins movement, you see that this will be even more difficult in the future. So if banks cannot be a monetary transmission any longer, therefore fundamentally credit institutions doing on the side other activities like payment, investment management, and insurance, what should banks become? Well, banks become financial advisors or planners for corporate, small businesses and families, where the credit side of their business after the risk management piece is rewarded by personalizing planning in front of families. Because in a world where the asset allocation commoditizes and you cannot make differentiation, the real personalization comes from the liabilities of peoples, because from the asset class perspective, we are very similar, but from the liabilities point of view, we are all different individuals. And that is when financial planning becomes the center of a new model for banks worldwide that generate value for clients. Therefore, a new sustainable stream of revenues for financial services.
But Paolo, I'm hearing from you that we should stop calling banks banks. We should reinvent another term. They're lifestyle coaches, educators. I'm hearing the word planners. Their role in our life should be immersive, invisible, to deal, as you said, with the inherent uncertainty of our life. And they should be with us holistically to understand us, our liability, and how we want to handle our life, and what are our purposes and missions in life.
Well, banks need to become advisors or partners of their clients to make more substantiated, better financial decisions. And being capable of revising these over time, because economic conditions change, society changes, and we need to become more flexible and adaptive in our way we are related to reality. Since banks are asked by regulators and by clients to be more transparent, they can also learn how to ask their corporate clients to be more transparent. So you see, the transparency becomes a mechanism that starts from financial markets and has an impact on the broader economy through the relationship of investing into corporate for the long term. That transforms a concept like SRI and ESG into impact, because it has an impact on the way people effectively make decisions from a personal or a corporate perspective, and that changes it all.
Yes, because essentially one's personal life and business life cannot be distinguished, and the economy and the ecology cannot be distinguished. We have to move into this type of holistic approach. But where do you see signs of that? I know that you've been thinking and talking a lot about who owns the business model. Already you have a very strong opinion about that, but are we getting closer? Do you see this happening, the holistic platform in our world?
I
and
think
where
this
do
is
you see
happening a bit at a time, and there are some examples in the US or in Europe. The major shift today is the attempt of banks to transform into a bank assurance mechanism. Some of them are still playing at the volume business, but I'm warning them, and they're learning that becoming an hyper volume will not be enough to survive, because hyper volumes also correspond to simplification of products. And therefore, when products are very simple and conversations become very simple, you can be more easily attacked by a big tech player that has many more touch points with the final clients. That's when banks are learning how to use artificial intelligence in a different way. Not much to learn about the client, but first of all to make sure that the client understands the value proposition of the bank, and only consequentially position their product opportunities in front of the client at the best moment with the best type of configuration. This shift requires time, but I think that we are seeing the relevant discussions now that we couldn't see 5 years ago, because there is an epistemological need of the industry to learn through trial and error, and we've been testing some digital models, realizing what can work and what can't work.
Let's close our conversation with a bit of a philosophical, high-level angle, because what I hear from our discussion is that everything that's happening in the markets around digitization of financial services, whether it's in payments, whether it's in the crypto world, and I'm saying those as the sort of two extremes, it's all about how to manage human uncertainty, and what we had thought of as the exogenous problems, right? And here it's really about how to handle that. You are proposing a theory that doesn't throw out the monetary policies, the way banks are set up. The crypto blockchain people are proposing let's get rid of that. Again, the aim is to minimize exogenous uncertainty and control. I'm hearing from you that we shouldn't try that.
Look, uncertainty cannot be minimized. We just have to learn how to deal with that. Clearly, there's better ways of dealing with economic problems, to build the trust, to have better automation, to create more security about the transactions and the information. But that, if you like, is just a layer. The real problem is somewhere else. The real problem is how individuals, which are human beings, relate to finance in a way that they can help themselves to go through life, to survive, and at the same time do good for the community and for the planet. That is the key element that we need to look at. Once that is addressed and identified properly, we can transform change into progress. Otherwise, it's only change.
But what you're talking about, Paolo, is all about a deeper awareness and understanding and introspection and consciousness at the end of the day of how we are in life and how we deal with it.
Well, we had the Middle Age, but then the Renaissance and the humanism in Rome. Maybe we are going through another Middle Age after the global financial crisis. I'm looking for the Renaissance 2.0, and that goes through financial market transparency.
Great. Thank you so much, Paolo, for this discussion today.
You're welcome.